Hey guys, it's Most of the Best, and it looks like I'm finally back for another classic video where I just talk about cartoons and animation. And here I am talking about animation history, and not just animation history, but Disney animation history. How exciting. This is a video that's been on my mind for a while, and now I'm finally going to follow up on it. Today I'll be doing a bit of a retrospective / review of a very important era in Disney films, the Golden Age. In a Disney movie context, the Golden Age refers to the Disney Studio's earliest feature-length films released from 1937 to 1942. But before I can properly get into these movies, I need to cover some of the history leading up to 1937. First things first, the conglomerate that is known today as the Walt Disney Company was first founded in 1923 as the Disney Brothers Cartoon Studio by brothers Walter Elias Disney and Roy Oliver Disney. Some of the studio's earliest works were these Alice comedies starring child actress Virginia Davis. Now, there's quite a bit I could cover, but what I will say is that the Disney Studio had always been an innovative bunch. In 1928, Walt Disney and Ub Iwerks directed and came out with Steamboat Willie, the debut of Mickey Mouse. This was the first cartoon to have synchronized sound. In 1932, after Iwerks had already left the studio, the company came out with Flowers and Trees, which was the first animated cartoon to use a 3-strip Technicolor process, which meant that it was full color. Although the studio managed to be quite established within theatrical shorts, Disney felt limited by only producing shorts. I think that it's fair to say that at this time, animated cartoons were viewed more as novelties, something that could make people sit down for a few minutes to laugh, but not much else. One might say that people still view it that way today. But anyway, Disney wanted to expand the scope of animation and create a feature-length film. Of course, this was a much larger prospect than shorts, and required a lot of preparation. I won't be getting too deep into it for now, but after years of production, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was premiered on December 21st, 1937. Snow White was quite a big gamble for the company, as the success or even the appeal of a movie like Snow White wasn't really guaranteed, although it's difficult to imagine considering that Disney basically prints money today. Back in the days of old Hollywood, Disney was a small studio, nowhere near on the level of studios like Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer or Warner Brothers. Snow White was called Disney's Folly, but the risk did pay off as Snow White was a very successful film.
Magic mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?
Starring Adriana Castellotti in the titular role, Snow White follows the German fairy tale by the Brothers Grimm. It's quite a conventional story when you get down to it. The evil stepmother tries to kill Snow White because of her beauty, but is thwarted by the kind-heartedness of the man she sent for the job. Snow White herself is left in exile but manages to persevere because of her attitude and her pure-hearted nature. Indeed, the woodland creatures help her and she settles in the home of the Seven Dwarves. All of the dwarves, except for Grumpy, take a liking to her, but she manages to win his heart in the end. In the final act, she eats an apple which puts her to sleep, but is woken up by Prince Charming so that they can live happily ever after. I probably didn't need to summarize the story like that, but I know many people today would scoff at a fairy tale story being played so straight, in lieu of much more cynical and subversive takes on the genre.
You can't marry a man you just met.
Let's get married.
Considering that many people might find it hard to take this movie seriously, or otherwise they would acknowledge its significance, but not much else. My opinion doesn't go in that direction. For one, I have no problem with fairy tale conventions, including all of what's presented in Snow White. Another thing is that I really prefer a much more straightforward film like Snow White, which doesn't try to reflect on what was done before. I love Snow White's story, and I love all of the characters in this movie, especially Snow White herself. Hi-ho! Moving on from the story, Snow White has amazing animation. Now, I'll be saying that more than once throughout this video, but the Disney studio never fails to disappoint. Many years were spent for the animators to work on their technique for the film. For example, there were Silly Symphonies cartoons released in the years preceding Snow White that tested out techniques that would be used in the final movie, like The Goddess of Spring in 1934, where they were trying to get a grip on animating normal proportioned characters. And The Old Mill, which was released not long before Snow White, that was a testing ground for realistic depictions of animals and nature, as well as for the multiplane camera. Real-life models were created to aid the animators in drawing the characters from different angles, which is a common technique even today, and live-action footage was also recorded as references, which is still done even today. This effort was spent to have the animators perfect their technique, and it was well worth it. The characters in Snow White move fluidly, never falling into the uncanny valley, and the effects are amazing. Snow White is a beautiful film from beginning to end, but it wasn't perfect. Something that the animators weren't able to fully figure out was the prince. Animating him caused them a lot of trouble that they couldn't really work around. As a result, in the final film, the prince has very little time on screen, and really doesn't move very much when he is on screen. Although I don't think that the prince ended up looking bad, it does show that there was room for improvement, which puts context to moments like the final act of Sleeping Beauty, where there was an extended sequence where the prince battles Maleficent as a dragon, which shows how much they improved in the 20 years between Sleeping Beauty and Snow White. Going on from the animation, the music is also great. Castellotti's voice is amazing to listen to, and the fact that Snow White is essentially her only major film role is quite unfortunate.
Wherefore art thou, Romeo?
Adriana Castellotti brings life to Snow White in a way that I can't imagine could be done by anyone else. Anyway, I spoke about Snow White a lot, but if I didn't, it would be a disservice. As the first fully animated feature film, Snow White is one of the most important movies ever created. I might even be crazy enough to say that all animated movies that came out since then owe their existence to Snow White. Snow White is certainly one of the greatest films ever made, and it ranks up in significance with The Wizard of Oz in my eyes. It is also one of my favorite movies too. I really can't get enough of Snow White, but that'll be enough for this section of my video. Here we have Pinocchio, based on the Italian children's book, The Adventures of Pinocchio. This movie was greenlit after Walt Disney read the book and really liked it. The movie starts with the toy maker Geppetto, who creates a puppet that comes to life, Pinocchio. But now that Pinocchio is alive, things can't be easy. I think that as a character, Pinocchio is the embodiment of a naive child, which is exactly what you would expect him to be. Pinocchio has just come to life. What would he know? He hasn't learned that fire is hot, like most other children would already know, or that the fact that he's made out of wood makes fire even more dangerous. Because of that, Pinocchio needs a guide, and Jiminy Cricket is given that role, as his conscience and guide to lead him through a very rough world. And indeed, the world is rough. In many ways, Pinocchio is a very disturbing movie. Almost everyone in this movie is dedicated to fooling Pinocchio or taking advantage of him in some way. Perhaps this movie is the perfect way to show children why they should never talk to strangers, because that's the cause of all of Pinocchio's problems. These two scammers looking for a quick buck lead Pinocchio away from his path to school to a puppet show where he's the star. By the way, I love this part of the movie. This song is great. What's not so great is the leader of the show who kidnaps Pinocchio to force him to be the star for the rest of the season. What's also not so great is that these scammers lure Pinocchio into another bad situation with a guy who turns boys into donkeys so that they can work on a farm. These are boys, not too different from Pinocchio, who were lured away from home with the promise that they could do whatever they wanted. It doesn't end well for them.
Mama!
What's notable is that none of these guys ever receive any form of comeuppance for this. As far as we know, they get away with this. The boys lured into this man's trap will forever work as farm animals. These two guys both got their profit, and although this guy didn't manage to keep Pinocchio, he still received his money at the end of the day. But instead of all of that, this is a movie about Pinocchio and him learning his lesson. Not only does he have to learn the harsh realities of life, but he also must become worthy of being a real boy. This scene where Pinocchio tries to lie to the fairy who gave him life is also one that I love. It's the only time in the movie where Pinocchio's famous growing nose actually grows, but as opposed to being a joke or a complex philosophical question, it's a great lesson that leads into what this movie is all about.
Remember, a boy who won't be good might just as well be made of wood.
The animation, of course, is amazing. In fact, I've been saving this part, but there's a great sequence at the end of the movie where Pinocchio and Geppetto escape the whale Monstro, and man, this is spectacular. Something I want to mention is that in Disney's early animated films, the music of the film was very woven into what you saw on screen, so the music became an active part of the experience. This scene in Pinocchio shows that as well as any. But what's also interesting is that as successful as Snow White was for Disney, Pinocchio on its first release was comparatively not. A bit strange in a reality where Disney can't help but make money, but Pinocchio was disappointing for the studio. However, history has been kind to it. Pinocchio currently stands at a 100% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and that is completely deserved. Pinocchio is a fantastic movie. Fantasia is really an interesting movie. It has a structure that is very different from most other Disney movies, where it consists of multiple shorts that are held together by a live-action orchestra. Because of these live-action portions, it might not really be accurate to refer to Fantasia as fully animated, but it nevertheless belongs to the Golden Age. If the name of the movie wasn't already an indication, just know that Fantasia is all about music. The concept of Fantasia actually started much smaller. A few years earlier, when Mickey Mouse had started to fall in popularity, the studio began to create a Silly Symphonies cartoon as a big comeback, but as the cost of the short rose, it was decided to expand the concept and make a feature-length film out of it, and that's what we have here. Fantasia is structured like a concert. There are 7 major segments in the movie, and each of these segments are set to the tune of various classical musical pieces, all of them conducted by Leopold Stokowski. The first segment is set to the Toccata and Fugue in D minor by Bach. This segment has live-action footage of the orchestra, as well as many animated segments that feature various effects. The second segment is set to various pieces from the Nutcracker Suite, composed by Tchaikovsky. The animations are of various scenes in nature like fireflies, mushrooms, and fish. These elements make movements that are as graceful as what one would expect to see in a Nutcracker ballet. The third segment is the one that started it all, set to The Sorcerer's Apprentice by Paul Dukas. If you know anything about Fantasia, then this is probably the segment that you're most familiar with. The German poem set to music makes the most narrative segment of Fantasia, about the apprentice who animates a broom to life to do his work. It doesn't go so well, and he ends up back where he started, having to do the work himself. Mickey Mouse is in the role of the apprentice, and this is probably his first feature film appearance, and he's voiced by Walt Disney.
Congratulations to you, Mickey.
Gee, thanks. Well, so long.
The next segment is set to Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. It depicts the beginning of the cosmos and of life on Earth, all the way down to the dinosaurs and their extinction. This segment is like a tour that takes us through space to the early harsh conditions of Earth, to the first organisms in the ocean, and through the dinosaurs as they lived. Between this and the fifth segment is an intermission, which of course was common in longer movies. The fifth segment, set to the Pastoral Symphony by Beethoven, portrays the world of Greek mythology with centaurs and other mythical creatures, concluding with the storm brought on by Zeus and a rainbow that comes afterwards. This segment also features a lot of not so flattering depictions, and I want to use this moment to talk about that for a bit. Yes, many of these earlier Disney movies do have racial depictions that are uncomfortable to look at today. With Fantasia specifically, modern releases of the movie do crop out parts of the picture to hide the more offensive parts. For me, I'm not really a fan of doing that. I don't like the idea of editing old movies to cut out or hide parts that we don't like, but as far as I'm aware, Disney has only done that with Fantasia. Anyway, what I will say on this subject is, I don't defend the depictions. They are very uncomfortable, but their presence doesn't affect my overall opinion of these movies. After all, this isn't D.W. Griffith level. Anyway, moving on, the sixth segment is set to Ponchielli's Dance of the Hours. This section is a ballet of various animals, ostriches, hippos, and crocodiles. This is a more humorous section of the movie. I think that the animators must have had good fun with it. The seventh and final segment has two parts. The first is set to Mussorgsky's Night on Bald Mountain. This is an intense depiction of evil, but one that is contrasted by the second part set to Schubert's Ave Maria, where people are called to worship as the day begins. As I've went over, the studio's mastery over integrating the score with the visuals is at full display in Fantasia. I must have shown enough of it by now to prove my point. Fantasia is a beautiful film. Bright colors are all around, with beautiful art and fluid animation. Because the movie is entirely structured around the score, every frame is drawn to fit the structure of the piece that the orchestra is playing. The sound of Fantasia is also very special. Fantasia's audio was recorded in multiple channels through a system called Fantasound. This was done to give the audience in theaters a feeling that they were truly in the presence of an orchestra. Fantasia's sound is multi-directional. It feels like it's traveling across the speakers, and even when not in theaters, it's a pretty interesting experience. Fantasia is unique among these films, and it is also truly fantastic in its construction. Fantasia is structured like a concert, and it feels like a performance. But once again, this quality didn't translate very well into profit, as Fantasia also wasn't very successful on its first release. Fantasia was originally released as a roadshow, and it performed similarly to Pinocchio. However, it is a great movie, and something that I think you ought to take 2 hours out of your day to watch.
Look out for Mr. Stork, that persevering chap, to come along and drop.
Pinocchio and Fantasia weren't big successors, which is what leads to Dumbo being the way that it is. Dumbo was made as a simpler and much shorter movie to help the studio in recouping the losses bought by previous releases. Based on a story written by Helen Aberson Mayer, Dumbo is about an elephant that was born with big ears, which makes him a subject of ridicule and isolation. Aside from by his mother, Dumbo really isn't respected too much. He's clumsy and seems to only cause trouble, which leads him to be separated from his mother. Here we enter Timothy Q. Mouse, who serves a similar role to Jiminy Cricket as Dumbo's companion, the one who accompanies him and protects him. After a drunken night near the end of the movie, Dumbo and Timothy end up in a tree. How did they end up in a tree? Well, they flew. As it turns out, Dumbo's big ears aren't for nothing and allow him to fly, and this ability allows Dumbo to reach new heights, no pun intended, and become the most popular attraction in the circus. And all is well in the end.
Dumbo! The ninth wonder of the universe! The world's only flying elephant!
So that was quite a short summary, but it's fitting because Dumbo is a very simple story. What I've just described are effectively the major details. Not much notable happens between that, and the movie itself is little over an hour long. But that's what Dumbo was meant to be, a simple story that would allow the studio to keep its doors open. The production of the movie only spans about a couple months before the movie actually came out, although there was a strike by some of the animators at Disney that halted the movie's release. Along with the simple story, the animation, while still great, doesn't have anywhere close to the same technical quality as the previous films. The character designs were simplified, the backgrounds were simplified, and there were no fancy effects that would make the movie too expensive. Although Bill Tacher, who animated the character Dumbo, did a darn good job.
They tell me that a man made a vegetable truck.
I didn't.
And of course, we have the crows. Although, even though people may cringe at the crows as a racial depiction, they're one of the few characters in the movie that support Dumbo and sympathize with him. In fact, they're the ones who help him learn to fly. They also sing a great song.
When I see an elephant fly.
Despite what I'm saying about this movie being made on the fast and cheap, I still do love it. The story might be simple, but I think it's a good type of simple. I like the simplicity of this story. I like many of the characters in this movie, including the crows, and I like the heartwarming way that it ends. When it was released, Dumbo did exactly what it was supposed to do and made money for Disney, leading us to 1942. Finally, we're here at Bambi, based on the novel by Frank Sultan, Bambi: A Life in the Woods. Bambi's history actually goes back a lot further than Dumbo. The rights to the novel were originally purchased by Sidney Franklin from MGM, who intended to make his own live-action film. When he decided that it wouldn't work out, he sold the rights to Disney. It was first supposed to be the second film after Snow White, but production pushed it to be released much later. Of course, Bambi is a film that doesn't have any human characters. All of its characters are animals, and the movie plays very deeply, of course, into its nature theme as it takes us through the seasons. The multiplane camera was put to good use in capturing the layering of different segments of the forest. The titular character, Bambi, is a newborn fawn who is soon to take up after his father in being the prince of the forest, the protector of the forest. In this way, Bambi is very much a coming-of-age film. The movie takes us through Bambi's childhood as he learns to walk, makes friends, and learns the many wonders, but also dangers and fears, of the forest he's a part of. Because of this, the first half of Bambi is a fairly slow-paced and relaxed movie.
Man was in the forest.
Yes, the first half. You know what's coming. You know exactly what's coming. Although I said Bambi has no human characters, that might not be completely true. There is an antagonist, and this character is known as Man. After this point, the movie goes on a very different course, as Bambi's father raises him into adulthood. Now Bambi must find his own way as the protector of the forest, through love and through danger. The movie ends in a way similar to how it started. Spring has come and the forest has a new great prince. Bambi is a beautiful film in its aesthetic. The art direction of the movie was led by Tyrus Wong, who was inspired by Eastern art and wilderness. Wong was also one of the background illustrators, and man, are these backgrounds just gorgeous. The whole forest in Bambi looks like a painting that has been brought to life. The studio, not being a group that's known to accept mediocrity, did a lot of work to make sure that the animals looked convincing. From observing how animals moved firsthand and going out in the wild to observe them in their natural environment, not once does Bambi ever cross into the uncanny valley. Going off topic here, but isn't it funny how a movie like Bambi, which is completely 2D, can make its animals look more convincing and expressive than that Lion King remake with a fraction of the budget even when adjusting for inflation? Anyway, speaking of the budget, Bambi didn't manage to make a profit on its first release, which makes sense, considering that it was released amid World War II, but later releases did make back its costs. And that's all good because Bambi is once again a fantastic movie. I love Bambi. It's one of my favorite Disney movies and one of my all-time favorite movies. I grew up with this movie, and I've always loved its atmosphere. Although it might have traumatized a lot of kids with this scene, Bambi is an amazing, well-put-together film, and that's a great conclusion to this era of Disney animated films. Wow, would you look at that video? I mean, I was expecting this video to be pretty long, but I can't say that I was expecting it to be this long. This is definitely the longest scripted video I've done. And that's what we're left with. 5 great movies, only one of which was a big success when it came out, with 3 of them being failures when initially released, and the other one only being a modest success. I love all of these movies, although Snow White and Bambi are my favorites out of them, but it's interesting to look back at a time when Disney didn't just print money and didn't own a third of the box office. This is a time when Disney was a small, minor studio and only made animated works. Now look at what they are today. Is that a good thing or is it a bad thing? Regardless of how that question should be answered, what I hope was a good thing for you is this video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I recommend that you watch all of these movies if you haven't yet. That'll be it for today. Peace, guys. I'm Mozart the Best.